This is going to be part 2 of our lecture on early medieval Europe. And in this second part, we're going to take a look first at medieval books. And we're going to look at the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells is an extremely ornate text, and it's absolutely stunning to look at. We believe that it was created in Ireland or Scotland right around 800 AD. And the letters on the page spell out XPI, or Chi Rho Iota, which is the abbreviation of the word Christ. And it marks the first time that Christ appears in the book of Matthew. Now, when we look at a page like this that is extremely ornate, it would have taken a month to produce this page alone. Generally, about 4 scribes and 3 painters worked on this book. And monasteries are where these books were created. They were centers of prayer, learning, and art. And this is really our first connection of the church as a patron to the arts. The monks and nuns as well would produce jewelry, carvings, and textiles. As the church grew in power, the commissions that they would have created would have grown larger and larger. They would even commission buildings, altars, crosses, reliquaries, vestments, images of Christian stories like you see here, and of course a tremendous amount of sacred texts. This is the front cover of the Lindau Gospels, and these were created after the Book of Kells around 870 AD. And it is gold, along with pearls, sapphires, garnets, and emeralds. And the book itself is roughly 14 inches tall and about 10 inches wide. We see up above grieving angels hovering above the cross, and we also have earthbound individuals below, kind of twisting in agony. The individuals directly above the cross are personifications of the sun and the moon, which hide their faces in anguish. And when we look at the center image of Christ, he doesn't appear to be hanging from the cross so much as he is standing before it, almost as if prefiguring his ultimate triumph over death. Now, books played a tremendously important role in the efforts of the Carolingian rulers to promote learning, propagate Christianity, and standardize church law and practice. You would have workshops that would produce key religious texts, and these workshops would also serve as proofreaders, omitting mistakes that would have been made, and they would have been in books for all those years of copying them by hand. The Carolingian scribes also worked on standardizing script, and they moved away from those ornate capitals like we saw in the Book of Kells. And this is also a page from the Lindisfarne Gospels, and these were all done on a medium called vellum, which is created from calfskin. And in fact, usually about 300 calfskin were needed for a book. The pigments for decoration were imported from faraway lands, and preliminary outlines were made for each of the drawings. So the idea of producing a text like this would have been incredible. Now, as far as use, this was not necessarily text that you would normally read, or like a checkout from the library, for instance, but many of these would have been carried in some type of ceremony or procession, displayed on an altar, and of course, we're not overlooking the idea of art or aesthetics here. The Abbey Church of CORVEY is an example of Carolingian architecture, and we'll just take a quick look at this church. Very imposing, strong masonry, fortress-like appearance. It is incredibly symmetrical, regular pattern of windows and doors, no elaborate carvings or decorations on the exterior, but we're going to see those in the next few chapters. But the church itself, it still looks pretty cool, even in the snow here. Now, after the Carolingian Empire, future family members become part of the Ottonian Empire. And the Ottonian Empire is led by Otto I, and then the second, and then Otto III. With some of the cool works that we have from this time period that are left over would be like this one here. This is just a small ivory carving. In fact, you can even call it a plaque. And it shows how tightly interconnected that the church and state are. This was taken from the altar at the Magdeburg Cathedral. And we have Otto I presenting a scale model of the cathedral, as you can see kind of in the lower left-hand corner. This very almost childlike man is presenting this building to Christ and St. Peter. And directly behind him is St. Maurice, who is the patron saint of the church. And the Magdeburg Cathedral is this structure here. Now, the architectural style for these large basilicas employed wooden roofs. And of course, when we think about it, these buildings were lit by candles, and the cathedral burnt down in 1008 AD, only 40 years after it was built. It was rebuilt in 1049, but it burns down again in 1207 and rebuilt once again. So it was definitely a trial by error here. And also, some of the churches of the time, such as the Cathedral of Mainz, burned down on the day of its consecration. Another church we'll look at is St. Michael's, and this is in Germany, and it's a beautiful church. The bishop here was a tutor of Otto III, and the bishop, besides being a scholar, loved the arts and was definitely a patron of those. Now, the most important thing besides the architecture of this building is that there was a commission for a set of bronze doors, and these are the doors here. The bishop had gone to Rome on a pilgrimage and returned to Hildesheim and wanted to recreate some of the work that he saw. So we read these doors from the upper left-hand side down to the bottom, and this left side of the door contains the Old Testament. So starting at the very top, we have like the creation of Eve, the presentation of Eve, temptation, and expulsion are like the first four images. And then the very one at the bottom left is the murder of Abel by Cain. And I'll show you a close-up of that image here. Now, the right-hand side door, that is images from the New Testament. And the stories here begin at the bottom and work their way up. So the way you read this door is kind of like the letter U, starting in the upper left-hand corner, zipping down to the bottom, crossing over, and then working your way up. So on the right-hand side, we would have scenes such as the Annunciation, Nativity, Adoration, and just a little bit above the midpoint of the door, we have the Crucifixion. And you'll notice that when we compare side by side what's happening on either panel, we have very similar aesthetics. For instance, the image at the left where we have temptation, the tree looks very much like the cross. And we also have Adam and Eve standing next to one another, and over at the right we also have two figures on either side of Christ. Now, the doors themselves, they're cast in solid bronze. And so when you think of bronze in art, it's very, very expensive. So the doors also are very massive. They're like 15 feet high. So these are the main artworks that I would like you to know from this chapter. The next video that we do is going to be on Romanesque art during the Middle Ages.